Montana Territory, December 1880. Winter had settled over the Blackfoot Valley like a shroud, burying the land in 3 feet of snow that glittered under a merciless sun. Luke Caldwell stood on the porch of his lonely cabin, scanning the frozen landscape with eyes the color of weathered denim. At 25, he had already seen enough of humanity to last several lifetimes. The war had taken his father. The frontier had claimed his mother and sister to fever. The railroad company had swindled his uncle out of their family ranch back east. All Luke had managed to salvage was enough money to stake this claim on 40 acres of hard Montana soil and build a cabin with his own 2 hands. In 2 years he'd transformed it from a dirt patch to a promising cattle operation, but the cost had been steep, complete isolation. "Christmas," he muttered, watching his breath cloud in the frigid air. Just another day to feed the stock. He had learned one truth that served him well. A man alone couldn't be disappointed, couldn't be betrayed. The frontier demanded everything, and attachment was a luxury that got people killed. Better to embrace the solitude than pretend the world offered anything else. Inside, Luke stoked the fire in his stone hearth before settling at his rough-hewn table to clean his Winchester. Tomorrow he would need to ride out and check on the cattle in the southern pasture, Christmas or not. The holiday meant nothing to a man with no one to share it with. His nearest neighbor, old Jasper Williams, had invited him to Christmas dinner, but Luke had politely declined. The widow Thompson and her 3 daughters would be there, and Luke knew matchmaking when he smelled it. Better to avoid entanglements altogether. He'd seen too many men go soft over a pretty face, only to lose everything they'd built. The frontier was no place for romance, just hard work and survival. As the evening deepened, snow began falling again, thick flakes driven by a wind that howled across the valley like a wounded animal. Luke added another log to the fire, grateful for the sturdy walls and roof. He had cured venison, coffee, beans, and even some whiskey, all a man needed to wait out a Montana winter night. The knock, when it came, was so faint he almost mistook it for a branch scraping against the cabin. But there it was again, more insistent this time. Luke frowned, reaching for his revolver. Visitors after dark in a snowstorm, 10 miles from the nearest settlement, meant trouble. Bandits maybe, though what they'd hoped to steal from his modest cabin was beyond him. "Who's there?" he called, positioning himself to the side of the door. "Please," came a woman's voice, weak and trembling. "I need water." Luke hesitated, suspicion warring with basic human decency. It could be a trick, lure the cabin's owner to the door with a woman's voice, then rush him when he opened it, but if it wasn't? He unlatched the door and pulled it open a crack, revolver ready. Standing on his porch was a young woman bundled in a snow-covered cloak, her face pale as the moon and her lips tinged blue with cold. She swayed slightly, one gloved hand braced against the doorframe. "Thank God," she whispered, before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed forward. Luke dropped his gun and caught her before she hit the porch. She weighed almost nothing in his arms as he carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly, a beautiful face framed by dark chestnut hair that had escaped from beneath her bonnet. She couldn't have been more than 21 or 22, dressed in a traveling dress of deep blue wool, now soaked with melting snow. "Miss, can you hear me?" Luke patted her cheek gently. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of amber. "Water," she managed, "please." Luke settled her in his only chair near the fire and quickly fetched a cup of water. She drank greedily, some color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger. "I thought I might die out there." "What in God's name are you doing traveling alone in a blizzard?" Luke demanded, harsher than he intended. The sight of her, young, beautiful, and clearly in danger, had rattled him more than he cared to admit. "My stagecoach overturned about 2 miles back," she explained. "The driver and the other passenger went for help, but I saw the light from your cabin and thought it would be safer to seek shelter." Luke frowned. "The stage route doesn't pass within 5 miles of here." She lowered the cup, meeting his gaze directly. "The driver said the regular pass was snowed in. They were trying an alternate route." She shivered. "I'm Sophia Foster. I was traveling to Helena to meet my fiancé." Luke's eyes automatically went to her left hand. No ring. Luke Caldwell, he replied. You're lucky you found my place. There's nothing else for 20 miles in that direction. Then I thank Providence for guiding me here. She attempted a smile, but another violent shiver overtook her. You need dry clothes, Luke said, suddenly businesslike. He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out one of his flannel shirts and a pair of wool trousers. These will be too big, but they're warm and dry. You can change behind that blanket. He gestured to a quilt hanging from a rope that sectioned off his sleeping area. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Luke, he corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the familiarity. She was engaged, after all, and he had no business thinking of her as anything but a stranded traveler. I'll make some coffee. While she changed, Luke busied himself with the coffee pot, trying not to think about the beautiful woman behind the quilt. When she emerged, she looked almost comical in his oversized clothes, the sleeves rolled up several times and the trousers cinched tight with a length of rope. But there was something about seeing her in his clothing that stirred something long dormant in him. Better? He asked gruffly. She nodded, settling back near the fire. Much. I hung my dress and undergarments to dry. A blush colored her cheeks at the mention of undergarments. I hope that's acceptable. Luke nodded, pouring her a cup of coffee and adding a generous splash of whiskey. Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside out. Sophia accepted the cup gratefully. Do you live here alone, Mr. Luke? I do. He sat across from her, studying her face in the firelight. Despite her ordeal, there was a strength in her features, a determined set to her jaw, and a brightness in her eyes that spoke of intelligence and spirit. That must be lonely, especially at Christmas. Luke shrugged. I prefer it that way, less complicated. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Everyone needs someone, even on the frontier. Not me, Luke said with finality. I've seen what happens when you start depending on people. They die or leave or betray you. Better to rely on yourself. Instead of being offended, Sophia regarded him thoughtfully. That sounds like the voice of experience. Luke didn't answer, rising to stir the stew he'd left simmering earlier. The less this woman knew about him, the better. Come morning, he'd ride her to Millerville, where she could catch the next stage to Helena. One night of disruption, then back to his orderly, solitary existence. You must be hungry, he said, changing the subject. I've got venison stew. That sounds wonderful. I haven't eaten since morning. Luke ladled stew into 2 bowls and cut thick slices of sourdough bread. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. This is delicious, Sophia said. You're quite the cook. Necessity, Luke replied. It was learned to cook or starve. How long have you lived here? 2 years, built the cabin myself. Impressive. She looked around the simple but sturdy interior with genuine appreciation. Most men I know couldn't build a decent chicken coop, let alone a home. Despite himself, Luke felt a flash of pride. It's nothing fancy, but it keeps the weather out. Sometimes the simplest things are the most valuable. She took another spoonful of stew. What brought you to Montana? Luke hesitated, then decided a partial truth wouldn't hurt. Needed a fresh start. Land was cheap, opportunity seemed good. And has it been good, I mean? Good enough. I've got 30 head of cattle, this cabin, and nobody telling me what to do. He meant it to sound satisfied, but even to his own ears it sounded defensive. Sophia seemed to sense his discomfort. Well, I'm grateful you're here. Without this cabin, I'd likely be buried in a snowdrift by morning. The thought of her frozen body in the vast Montana wilderness sent an unexpected chill through Luke. Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, I'll take you to Millerville. You can catch a stage to Helena from there. Thank you, Daniel, my fiancé, will be worried sick. She twisted her hands in her lap. We were supposed to be married on Christmas Day. I'm sorry you'll miss your wedding, Luke said, surprised to find he meant it. Perhaps it's for the best, Sophia said quietly. I've been having doubts. Luke should have changed the subject. A stranger's romantic troubles were none of his business. but something in her expression made him ask, "What kind of doubts?" Sophia sighed, staring into the fire. "Daniel is a good man, stable, successful, my father's business partner in Helena. The match makes perfect sense. But I'm not certain I love him." She looked up, meeting Luke's gaze with surprising directness. "Isn't that terrible? Most girls would be thrilled to marry a wealthy, respectable businessman." "Not if you don't love him," Luke said before he could stop himself. "My mother says love grows with time. That passion fades, but partnership endures." She smiled ruefully. "She married for love herself, though. My father was a poor shopkeeper. When they wed, he built his business from nothing." "Then why push you toward a loveless marriage?" "Security," Sophia replied simply. "The world isn't kind to women without means or protection. My mother nearly starved during their first years together." She shook her head. "Enough about my troubles. Tell me about your cattle operation." Luke recognized the deflection, but respected her right to privacy. He found himself describing his small herd, his plans for expansion, the challenges of winter grazing, talking more than he had in months. Sophia listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that showed she wasn't just being polite. As the evening wore on, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the shutters and snow piled against the door. Luke added more logs to the fire, acutely aware that they were trapped together until the blizzard passed. "You should take the bed," Luke said as the hour grew late. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly take your bed," Sophia protested. "You can and you will," Luke said firmly. "You've had a hard day, and it's the only decent thing to do." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Luke arranged blankets near the hearth, while Sophia settled into his bed. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Luke lay awake, listening to the storm and trying to ignore the unfamiliar feeling spreading through his chest, something dangerously close to contentment. Morning brought silence, the heavy, absolute silence that follows a major snowstorm. Luke rose before dawn, careful not to wake Sophia as he stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil. When he opened the door, he faced a wall of snow nearly reaching the lintel. "That's not good," he muttered, grabbing a shovel. It took nearly an hour to clear a path to the stable where his horse nickered a greeting. The world outside was transformed, drifts taller than a man, the familiar landscape rendered alien under its white blanket. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, Sophia was awake and dressed in her now dry traveling clothes. Her hair was neatly braided, her expression apologetic. "I'm afraid we might be snowed in," Luke said without preamble. "The drifts are 4 feet deep in places." Sophia's face fell. "So I've missed my wedding." "Looks that way," Luke hesitated. "I'm sorry." To his surprise, she didn't seem devastated. "Perhaps it's a sign." At his questioning look, she added, "that I should reconsider." Luke busied himself with breakfast, flapjacks and bacon, a luxury he rarely bothered with when alone. As they ate, he found himself studying her covertly. In daylight, she was even more beautiful than he'd first thought. Her chestnut hair had golden highlights, and her amber eyes sparkled with intelligence. There was a dusting of freckles across her nose that he found inexplicably charming. "How did you learn to cook like this?" she asked, savoring a bite of flapjack drizzled with molasses. "My mother," Luke answered, the words escaping before he could stop them. He rarely spoke of his family. "She taught you well." "She had to. My father was away fighting, and someone needed to help feed my sister." The memory was bittersweet, standing on a chair beside the cook stove, his mother patiently showing him how to test the griddle's heat. "You have a sister." Had Luke's tone made it clear he didn't want to elaborate, Sophia nodded, respecting his boundaries. "My brother taught me to fish," she offered. "Our father was always working, so James took me to the creek every summer." Mother was scandalized, said no gentleman would want a wife who smelled of fish and could tie her own flies. The image of a younger Sophia, sun-kissed and proudly holding up a trout, made Luke smile. "Your brother sounds like a good man." "He was," her expression clouded. "We lost him at Shiloh." "I'm sorry," Luke said, the familiar grief of war losses washing over him. My father fell at Gettysburg. Their eyes met across the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. In that instant, Luke felt a connection he'd been avoiding for years, the recognition of shared pain, shared loss. The moment broke when Sophia stood to clear the dishes. "Let me help with these, it's the least I can do for your hospitality." They fell into an easy rhythm, washing and drying the few dishes. For the first time in years, Luke's cabin felt like a home rather than merely shelter. "What will we do today?" Sophia asked, "since we're snowed in?" The week caught Luke off guard. He hadn't considered how they would pass the time together. "I need to check on the cattle in the barn," he said. "Beyond that, I don't usually do much besides chores." "May I come with you to the barn? I'd like some fresh air, and I promise not to be in the way." Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Bundle up, it's bitter out there." Together they trudged through the cleared path to the barn, where Luke's small herd had been moved for the worst of winter. The familiar routine of feeding and watering took on a different quality with Sophia helping. She wasn't afraid of the work, handling pitchfork and water buckets with practiced ease. "You've done this before," Luke observed. "My grandparents had a farm in Pennsylvania," she explained. "I spent summers there as a girl," she stroked a heifer's nose. "I've always loved animals. Daniel thinks it's childish. He says cattle are merely inventory." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "Sounds like a real charmer, this Daniel," Luke commented dryly. Sophia laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to light up the dim barn. "He has his qualities: punctuality, thrift. An excellent head for figures." Her smile faded. "Just not much poetry in his soul, I suppose." "And you want poetry?" Luke asked, surprising himself with the question. "Not literally," she said thoughtfully. "But yes, I want someone who sees beauty in a sunset, who understands why I might want to ride out just to watch a thunderstorm roll across the plains, who knows that cattle aren't just inventory but living creatures with personalities." She blushed. "I sound like a foolish romantic." "No," Luke said quietly. "You sound like someone who knows what matters." Their eyes met over the back of the heifer, and Luke felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility he had long denied himself. The day passed in comfortable companionship. Luke showed Sophia his small but growing library. Books had been his one indulgence, ordered from catalogs and carried back from rare trips to Helena. She delighted in discovering they shared a love for Whitman and Thoreau, quoting passages from memory that had also resonated with him. As evening approached, Luke realized with a start that this was Christmas Eve. In the surprise of Sophia's arrival and the aftermath of the storm, he'd lost track of the date. "It's Christmas Eve," he said as they prepared a simple supper together. "So it is." Sophia paused in slicing bread. "The first Christmas Eve I've spent away from family." "I'm sorry it's not much of a celebration," Luke said, feeling strangely inadequate. "I don't usually observe the holiday." "Why not?" Luke shrugged. "No point celebrating alone." "But you're not alone this year," Sophia pointed out, "and neither am I." There was a warmth in her voice that made Luke look up. She was smiling at him, a gentle expression that made his heart beat faster. "No," he agreed. "We're not alone." After supper they sat before the fire drinking coffee laced with the last of Luke's whiskey. Outside, the temperature had plummeted, stars glittering in a sky cleared of clouds. The cold seemed to press against the cabin walls, making the warmth inside feel all the more precious. "Tell me about your family," Sophia said softly, "if you don't mind." In the firelight, with whiskey warming his blood, Luke found himself speaking of things he'd kept locked away for years. He told her about his father, a principled man who had opposed slavery though he had no personal stake in the issue. About his mother's strength after news of his father's death came. About his sister Emma's bright spirit and how quickly the frontier fever had taken her, leaving him and his mother devastated. "She didn't last the winter," Luke finished. "Just seemed to lose the will to go on after Emma died." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said, and he could see tears glistening in her eyes. "To lose them all so close together." "It's why I came west," Luke admitted. Too many ghosts back in Pennsylvania. But you brought them with you, she observed gently, in your heart. Luke looked away, uncomfortable with her insight. What about you? You mentioned a brother, but what about the rest of your family? Sophia accepted the change of subject gracefully. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a merchant who had built a successful dry goods business. About her mother's determined social climbing and her father's good-natured tolerance of it. About summers at her grandparents' farm, where she'd learned to love the rhythms of rural life. My mother was horrified when father decided to expand the business to Montana territory, she said. She thought we were moving to the edge of civilization, but I was thrilled. I'd read so many stories about the frontier. And has it lived up to your expectations? Luke asked. Sophia considered the question, yes and no. It's harder than the stories make it sound, colder, more dangerous, but also more beautiful. She looked around the cabin, more real somehow. It's not for everyone, Luke said. Most who come thinking it's some grand adventure don't last their first winter. But you did. I didn't come for adventure. I came because I had nowhere else to go. And now, is it still just a place to exist, or has it become home? The question struck deeper than Luke expected. He'd built his cabin, established his small ranch, but had he ever truly considered it home? Or was it merely the place he happened to be? I don't know, he answered honestly. Sophia nodded as if his answer confirmed something. Daniel wants me to help him convince my father to move the business back east, she said. He says Montana is too crude, too primitive for people of quality. Luke felt a flash of irrational anger. And what do you think? I think, she hesitated, then met his gaze directly. I think there's a strength here, a purity. The land demands honesty, no pretense, no false faces. You either survive by your own efforts and the goodwill of neighbors, or you don't survive at all. Not everyone sees it that way. No, she agreed, Daniel certainly doesn't. He sees wilderness to be tamed, resources to be exploited, profit to be extracted. She shook her head. I sound disloyal speaking of him this way. You sound like someone questioning whether you share the same values, Luke said. Seems important to know before you marry. Sophia fell silent, staring into the fire. Luke could almost see the thoughts chasing across her expressive face. When I was a girl, she said finally, I promised myself I would never marry without love. Real love, not the convenient arrangements my mother's friends made. I wanted what my parents had, a partnership built on genuine affection and respect. What changed? I grew up, she said simply. Realized how vulnerable a woman alone can be. How few options we truly have. She twisted her hands in her lap. Daniel offered security, position, a comfortable life. At the cost of your happiness. Better comfortable misery than desperate poverty. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At least that's what I told myself. Luke leaned forward. You deserve more than comfortable misery, Sophia. The sound of her name on his lips seemed to hang in the air between them. He rarely used it, as if keeping that small distance might protect him from the growing feelings he couldn't deny. What if there isn't more to be had? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There is, Luke said with a certainty that surprised him. I've seen it. My parents had it before the war, a love that made hard times bearable and good times sweeter. And have you found it? The question struck him like a physical blow. I stopped looking, he admitted, decided it wasn't worth the risk. The risk of loss. Yes. Sophia regarded him steadily. But you've already lost everyone. What more could life take from you? Her words stripped away the protective layers he'd built around himself. She was right, he had already endured the worst. His isolation wasn't protecting him from pain, it was preventing healing. I should check the fire, Luke said abruptly, rising to add another log even though the blaze was still strong. Sophia didn't press him, and for that he was grateful. They passed the rest of the evening in quieter conversation, but something had shifted between them, a recognition of shared understanding that neither could easily dismiss. When it came time to retire, Luke again insisted Sophia take the bed while he made his pallet by the fire. As she wished him good night, she hesitated, then leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Luke," she whispered. The spot where her lips had touched his skin seemed to burn long after she had gone to bed. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off the endless expanse of snow. Luke had risen early, unable to sleep with the turmoil of emotions Sophia had awakened. He stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the white landscape in shades of pink and gold, and tried to make sense of what was happening to him. In just 2 days, this woman had breached defenses he'd spent years building. She saw through his carefully constructed solitude to the loneliness beneath. Worse, she made him want things he'd convinced himself were beyond reach: connection, companionship, the possibility of love. But she was engaged. Promised to another man, regardless of her doubts. And tomorrow or the next day, when the snow melted enough for travel, she would leave. Return to Helena, to Daniel, to the life she had planned before a snowstorm brought her to his door. The thought left a hollow feeling in his chest. "It's beautiful," Sophia's voice came from behind him. Luke turned to find her wrapped in a blanket, hair loose around her shoulders, watching the sunrise with the same appreciation he felt. "Merry Christmas," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Merry Christmas," he replied. The words felt strange on his tongue after so many years of letting the day pass unmarked. "I'm sorry I have no gift for you," she said. Luke looked down at her, at the way the rising sun gilded her features and turned her hair to living flame. "Your company is gift enough," he said honestly. Sophia blushed, a becoming rose tinting her cheeks. "Still, it seems wrong not to mark the day somehow." Luke thought for a moment. "I might have something," he said. "Wait here." He went to the barn, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I was going to trade these in town next month," he explained, suddenly self-conscious. "But I'd like you to have them." Sophia unwrapped the package carefully. Inside lay a pair of exquisitely carved wooden combs, the design a delicate pattern of intertwining vines and tiny flowers. "Luke," she breathed, "they're beautiful. Did you make these?" He nodded, embarrassed. "Winter evenings get long. Carving passes the time." "You're an artist," she said, running her finger over the intricate details. "These must have taken hours." "I had plenty to spare," he said with a shrug, though her praise warmed him more than he cared to admit. "Will you help me put them in?" she asked, offering the combs back to him. Luke hesitated, then took them. With careful fingers, he gathered sections of her hair and secured them with the combs. The simple act felt profoundly intimate, her hair soft beneath his calloused hands, her scent filling his senses, her trust in allowing him this closeness. "There," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Sophia touched the combs gently, then turned to face him. They were standing very close, her upturned face just inches from his. Something in her expression made his heart race. "I wish I had something for you," she said softly. "You do," Luke found himself saying. "You brought Christmas back to me." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Luke thought she might step away. Instead, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it sent a jolt through Luke like lightning striking dry timber. When she pulled back, her eyes were questioning, uncertain. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "I'm engaged to another man." "I know." Luke's hands had somehow found their way to her waist, holding her gently. "This is madness. We barely know each other." "I know," he repeated, unable to form more coherent thoughts with her so close. "I should go inside," she said, but made no move to leave his embrace. A gust of wind swirled snow from the roof, breaking the moment. Sophia stepped back, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. "We should go in," Luke agreed, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. "It's too cold out here." Inside, an awkward tension filled the space that had been so comfortable the night before. Luke busied himself with breakfast preparations, while Sophia sat at the table, fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I shouldn't have presumed." "Don't apologize," Luke interrupted. "Please. If anyone should apologize, it's me. You're in a vulnerable position, stranded here, and I took advantage." "No," Sophia said firmly. "You didn't take advantage, I kissed you." Luke turned from the stove to face her. "Why?" The directness of the question seemed to catch her off guard. "Because," she hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Because in 2 days you've made me feel more seen, more understood, than Daniel has in a year of courtship. Because when you look at me, I don't feel like a business arrangement or a suitable match, I feel like a woman." Her voice dropped, "because I wanted to." The simple honesty of her answer left Luke speechless. He'd expected equivocation, perhaps even regret. Instead, she offered truth as clear and bracing as the winter air. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm promised to another man. A good man, even if we want different things from life. Breaking that promise wouldn't be honorable." "No," Luke agreed, though the word tasted bitter. She was right, honor demanded she keep her word, regardless of the feelings blooming between them. "But I can't marry him," Sophia continued, her voice strengthening with conviction. "Not now, not knowing there could be more that I could feel." She gestured between them. This hope flared in Luke's chest, tempered immediately by caution. "What will you do?" "Return to Helena, break my engagement properly face to face, explain to my parents." She smiled ruefully. "They won't be pleased." "And then?" Sophia met his gaze steadily. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain Montana rancher might be interested in courting a disgraced former fiancé with a scandalous reputation for breaking engagements." Luke crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've spent 2 years convincing myself I was better off alone. Then you knocked on my door asking for water, and in 2 days you've washed away years of bitterness and fear." "Is that a yes?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. In answer, Luke leaned forward and kissed her, not the hesitant brush of lips they had shared on the porch, but a proper kiss, full of promise and barely restrained passion. When they finally broke apart, Sophia's eyes were shining. "I'll take that as a yes," she whispered. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a kind of enchanted haze. They cooked together, shared stories, and planned for the future with cautious optimism. Luke found himself smiling more than he had in years, the weight of loneliness lifting from his shoulders. As evening approached, Sophia stood at the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. "The snow is starting to melt," she observed. "The drifts aren't as high as yesterday." Luke joined her, noting the slight depression in the snow blanket. Another day or 2 of sun like today, and the trail to Millerville should be passable. "And then I'll have to leave." Sophia's reflection in the glass looked pensive. "Only for a time," Luke said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'll come to Helena as soon as the passes clear completely, meet your family properly." She turned to face him, eyes serious. "They may not approve. My father had his heart set on this match with Daniel. It consolidated their business interests." "Then I'll prove myself worthy," Luke said with determination. "I may not be wealthy, but I have a good start here. Honest work, land of my own. I can offer you a life, maybe not as comfortable as what Daniel promised, but one built on something real." Sophia placed her hand against his cheek. "I don't need wealth. I need this, a man who sees me, who shares my values, who understands that happiness comes from more than material comfort." Luke turned his face to kiss her palm. "I'll come for you in spring," he promised. "As soon as the trails are clear." "I'll be waiting," she said, "however long it takes." 2 days later, the snow had melted enough that Luke deemed it safe to travel to Millerville. He saddled his horse and prepared his sleigh, a simple affair he'd built for hauling supplies, but that would serve to transport Sophia to town. As they prepared to depart, Sophia stood in the center of the cabin, looking around with a wistfulness that matched Luke's own feelings. "It's strange," she said. "I've only been here a few days, yet it feels like leaving home." "It will be your home," Luke said, "when you return." She smiled at that, a bright, genuine smile that warmed him from within. "Yes. When I return." The journey to Millerville took longer than usual, with snow still deep in places, but by mid-afternoon they reached the small settlement. News of a stagecoach to Helena was promising. One was expected the following day, weather permitting. Luke secured Sophia a room at the town's only hotel, a modest establishment that nonetheless represented luxury compared to his cabin. They ate dinner together in the hotel's dining room, acutely aware of the curious glances from other patrons. An unmarried man and woman dining together caused speculation in a town the size of Millerville. "Let them talk," Sophia said when Luke mentioned the stairs. "In a few months they'll have a proper wedding to gossip about instead." The boldness of her statement, the certainty of their future together, filled Luke with a joy he could scarcely contain. For so long he had convinced himself that happiness wasn't meant for him, that connection only led to loss. Now, looking at Sophia across the table, he wondered how he could have been so blind. That evening, standing in the hotel lobby to say goodnight, Luke found it nearly impossible to leave. "I'll see you in the morning," he promised, "before the stage departs." Sophia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's not goodbye," she said, "just until spring." "Until spring," Luke agreed, pressing a chaste kiss to her forehead. All that propriety would allow in such a public setting. As he rode back to his cabin in the gathering dusk, the structure that had been merely shelter for 2 years looked different to him. Now it represented possibility, a future shared, a life built together. The solitude that had once been his refuge now felt like an emptiness waiting to be filled. Winter stretched long after Sophia's departure. Luke threw himself into preparations for spring, expanding the barn, clearing more grazing land, planting a proper vegetable garden instead of the haphazard patch he'd maintained before. Each improvement was made with Sophia in mind, each change a step toward the future they had promised each other. Letters came sporadically, carried by whoever happened to be traveling from Helena. Sophia wrote of her parents' initial disappointment at her broken engagement, of Daniel's cold fury, of the social fallout that had been painful but bearable. With time, she reported, her father had come to accept her decision, especially after she had shown him Luke's letters detailing his ranch operations and plans for expansion. "Father says any man who can write so knowingly about cattle management and soil quality is worth meeting," she wrote. "Mother remains skeptical, but I believe she will come around once she sees how happy I am." Luke read her letters by lamplight, tracing the elegant script with his fingers, imagining her voice speaking the words. Each letter strengthened his resolve, each page a reminder of what waited when winter finally released its grip on the land. Spring came late to the Blackfoot Valley. April brought mud and false starts, teasing warmth followed by bitter cold snaps. But by early May, the passes were finally clear, the roads dry enough for travel. Luke prepared for the journey to Helena with meticulous care, his best clothes cleaned and pressed, the silver belt buckle that had been his father's polished to a high shine, a small wooden box containing his mother's gold wedding band tucked safely in his pocket. The night before his departure, Luke stood on his porch watching the stars emerge in the deepening blue of the evening sky. So much had changed since that snowy night when Sophia had knocked at his door. The man who had planned to spend Christmas alone, convinced that solitude was his only option, now counted the hours until he could begin a shared life. As he turned to go inside, a movement on the road caught his eye, a rider approaching, silhouetted against the last glow of sunset. Luke frowned, visitors were rare and he wasn't expecting anyone. He waited, one hand resting near the revolver at his hip as the rider drew closer. Then his heart leaped as he recognized the straight-backed figure, the graceful way she handled her mount. "Sophia," he called, disbelieving. She urged her horse forward, her face coming into view, flushed with exertion, radiant with joy. "Luke." He was off the porch in an instant, reaching her just as she dismounted. She flew into his arms with an abandon that matched his own, her kiss as sweet and necessary as air. "What are you doing here?" he asked when they finally broke apart. "I was leaving for Helena tomorrow." "I couldn't wait," she said simply. "The stage was too slow, so I borrowed Father's best mare." She laughed at his expression. "Don't worry, he knows. In fact, he gave me his blessing." "Your father." He said any man who could inspire such determination in his daughter must be worth the journey. She touched his face gently. He was right. Luke lifted her off her feet in an embrace that made her laugh with delight. "I can't believe you're here," he said, "that you came back." "I promised I would," Sophia said. "This is where I belong." As the stars brightened overhead, Luke led Sophia and her horse toward the cabin, not just a shelter now, but a home waiting to be filled with shared life. On the porch he paused, drawing the small wooden box from his pocket. "I was going to do this in Helena with your family present," he said, suddenly nervous, "but since you're here." He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who brought light back into my life." He took a deep breath. "Sophia Foster, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "with all my heart, yes." As Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, the last walls around his heart crumbled completely. The man who had planned to spend Christmas alone had found, instead, a love that would warm every season to come. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Luke stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the stars emerge. Behind him, lamplight spilled from the windows, and the sounds of Sophia preparing their celebration drifted on the crisp air. Her parents would arrive tomorrow for Christmas dinner, the first of what would become a tradition at the Caldwell ranch. As snowflakes began to fall, soft and gentle in the gathering dusk, Luke remembered another snowy night, a knock at the door, a request for water, the beginning of everything that mattered. He smiled, turning back toward the warm light of home, toward the love that had transformed his life when he least expected it. The frontier might be harsh, the winters long, the work never-ending. But Luke Caldwell had learned what truly mattered, not just surviving but living fully, loving deeply, and finding home in another's heart.